सर्वभावा साधु जनाधार सर्वभावा यादव कृष्ण यदुकुल कृष्ण यादव कृष्ण यदुकुल कृष्ण मामव माधव देवा अम्बुजलोचन कम्बुशुभग्रीव अम्बुजलोचन कम्बुशुभग्रीव बिम्बादर चन्द्रबिम्बानन साम्भेयनाशाग्रे लग्नसुमौक्तिक साम्भेयनाशाग्रे लग्नसुमौक्तिक शरद चन्द्र जनित मदन शरद चन्द्र जनित मदन मामव माधव देवा कृष्ण यादव कृष्ण यदुकुल कृष्ण मामव माधव देवा कृष्ण
Thank you very much, madam. Now, welcome address by me. Welcome all to this 62nd. This is our 62nd monthly meet. So almost we have crossed 5 years. Every month you are holding a meeting on any subject on Vaishnavism, and we have been doing it successfully also. Now, I have great pleasure in welcoming you all these alumni meet, and today is a special day for me because the speaker, Dr. Pannirselvam, is my mentor. He is a friend, philosopher, and guide virtually to me. He is a philosopher of great repute. He can talk on any subject, whether it is Western philosophy or Indian philosophy or Buddhism or Jainism, anything. You quote anything, he will be able to deliver the lecture. He has got such a vast knowledge, and he has studied actually Western philosophy, and he delved into Advaita. Now his favorite field is Visishtadvaita. I think I'm correct. Yes, sir. And he is the Secretary General of Indian Philosophical Association and also Secretary of Chennai Philosophical Forum. A lot more to talk about him, but I don't want to deprive you of your chance of hearing him more. Even though Advaita and Visishtadvaita are parallel concepts, the topic he has chosen to deal with today is contradictory, is not contradistinction between Ramanuja's realism and Advaita's Sankara's idealism. But it is going to be a highlight of the opposite qualities of contradicting each other. I now request him to commence his lecture. Dr. Pannirselvam, please, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Professor TKP, sir, Dr. Jagan Nivas, Lata Vasuji, and other friends who are with us today. It is a pleasure to talk about the significance of Vaishnavism in this 62nd monthly meeting of alumni meeting of Vaishnavism department. I have a great respect for the Vaishnavism department because I had the opportunity of moving with great scholars like Professor Narasimhachari sir, Professor Venkatakrishnan, and my good friend Dr. VKSN Raghavan, who I would say has molded me. Because initially I was very much interested in Advaita only, because my PhD thesis was on Advaita. But later I got converted, I always use the word, to Vaishnavism by my great friend Professor Raghavan. He has taught me the nuances of Vishishtadvaita, and the way he taught us really is a great boon for me, because it is only from him I learned Vishishtadvaita philosophy. It is my good fortune that Professor V.K.S.N. Raghavan has been with me, and he has been guiding me a lot. Whenever I have some doubt with regard to some text in Vaishnavism, especially Sri Bhashyam or any other text for that matter, I would immediately consult him to get his views. And he's a versatile scholar, all of us know, he's a walking encyclopedia. He would immediately give some quotations and references. And it is a fascinating experience for me to listen to him and other great scholars of Vaishnavism department. And at this juncture, I must mention my good friend, Professor TKP, Professor TK Parsardi, who is affectionately known as TKP, who has contributed substantially for Vishishtadvaita philosophy. In fact, his book, which he has published, Vishishtadvaita as Immanent and Transcendental Philosophy, is a remarkable philosophy which gives, in a nutshell, the philosophy of Vishishtadvaita. I still remember when he joined the Department of Philosophy as a research scholar. And from that time onwards, we have been very good friends, and he has been reading a lot. This is something really remarkable at this age. After his retirement, he joined the Vaishnavism department for his MA, and then he joined the philosophy department as a PhD scholar under the guidance of Professor R. Gopalakrishnan. And from that time onwards, he has been showing interest not only in Vaishnavism philosophy, but also in learning philosophical concepts. And this is very encouraging. And he always gives us some guidance. So I am very grateful to him and other scholars who have assembled here for this wonderful opportunity to share some of my views. I'm always afraid of talking about Vishishtadvaita in the presence of great scholars like you. But this is my humble attempt And also, I would like to share my my problem in the sense that this I've been telling my friends. I remember I was talking to Professor Jagannivas some years back that how the Vaishnavite scholar should approach the concepts, giving the philosophical significance, explaining the significance of philosophy, which is very much present in Vaishnavism. So I made an humble attempt in placing before you the significance of Ramanuja in the context of realism idealism debate, which is very much prevalent in Western philosophical discourse. I, being a student of philosophy, always have the fascination of comparing East with the West, especially when I read Vishishtadvaita philosophy or whatever I know from great teachers like Professor Raghavan and Professor TKP. I feel that many of the Western philosophical concepts are very much present in Vishishtadvaita philosophy. But many of us fail to understand the significance of Vishishtadvaita philosophy. And it is the need of the hour to understand the significance of Vishishtadvaita in relation to or in comparison to some of the Western philosophical methods. You might ask me the question why we should know the Western philosophical methods in order to understand Vaishnava philosophy. I feel that the Vishishtadvaita philosophy is not limited to Indian soil alone. It is a global philosophy. I'm using the word global philosophy in order to show that many of the modern, I quote the word modern Western philosophical trends are very much visible if you closely observe Vishishtadvaita philosophy. For example, in the 20th and 21st century, we are talking about the contemporary movements in philosophy. For example, we are talking about hermeneutics, the interpretation of the text. We are also talking about the phenomenology and other philosophical movements, linguistic philosophy. These are some of the very prominent movements in the Western philosophical tradition. But all these three movements, of course, there are other movements also. I'm referring to these three movements. And all these three movements are very much present in Vishishtadvaita philosophy. The only thing is we fail to notice the significance or the great contributions made by Sri Ramanuja and the followers of Ramanuja. For example, in Western tradition, we have a movement called phenomenology. That phenomenology method or the phenomenological method is very much present in Vishishtadvaita philosophy. Similarly, the interpretation of the text, otherwise known as hermeneutics, is also very much visible in Vishishtadvaita philosophy. So, what I'm trying to say is that Vishishtadvaita philosophy is not a regional philosophy. It is a global philosophy for the main reason that some of the nuances which you find in Western tradition can be seen in Indian tradition, especially Vishishtadvaita philosophy. So, keeping this at the backdrop, I was thinking how we can situate Vishishtadvaita philosophy or Ramanuja philosophy in the famous debate between realism and idealism. So, this is in contradistinction to Advaita Vedanta. And I would always say that Ramanuja supported realism, whereas Advaita supported idealism. Because there has been a great debate between the realists and idealists, which is better, or I would rather ask the question, which is the need of the hour? Whether idealism is needed or realism is needed, and how we can situate these movements, the Western movements like realism or idealism, in Indian context. This is very important. This is a need of the hour. That is, we have to contextualize the philosophical significance of Ramanuja. Of course, one can quote from the scriptures, and also one can argue the great contribution made by the Vishishtadvaita scholars. But I always have the feeling that it has to be related to the Western tradition also, because there are many elements which the Westerners are proud of, can be seen in Vishishtadvaita philosophy. There are great Western thinkers like Carmen, for example, Lipner, then our Francis Clooney, and many others have contributed substantially for the progress of Vishishtadvaita philosophy. In fact, I was remembering a well-known book by Lipner. Long back, I read that book, some 20 years ago, I think. I read the book of Lipner. Very, very important book, which was given by one of my students in Madras University. When I read that book, I was so much impressed by the way in which Lipner, after that, I could not get that book. I was trying to get that book. It is about Ramanuja's understanding of language. This is a new linguistic approach of Ramanuja was attempted by Lipner. I still remember what I read in that book, comparing Ramanuja with that of the linguistic philosophy of the West, or philosophy of language. So, Vishishtadvaita is not a regional philosophy, it is a global philosophy, as I said just now. So, keeping this at the backdrop, we can see how Ramanuja has developed a realistic philosophy in contradistinction to Sankara's idealistic philosophy. One of the important philosophers of the West is Bosanquet. He says, I quote him, idealists and realists are traditional battle cries and watchwords rather than names of precision. Unquote. This quotation of Bosanquet clearly shows that the tussle between idealism and realism is ancient one, and the battle still goes on. But what is needed is, among these two, whether it is realism or idealism, which is the need of the hour, which gives us a practical solution to some of our problems. So, if that is a criterion for understanding philosophy, then I would say Ramanuja's realism is praiseworthy for the reason that it tries to solve the problems of human being. So it is a pragmatic philosophy. It gives solace to the human self or soul. And hence, I would say Ramanuja, as a practical philosopher, has given a guidance to the entire humanity. Now, how do we analyze this realism and idealism debate? Realism, in short, maintain the view that the universe as a whole is in time, evolution or change. This, in nutshell, is realism. That is, the entire universe as a whole is in time. This has got a special significance. When I read this definition of realism, my mind immediately connected this with Ramanuja's theory of evolution and dissolution. So everything happens in time. So the best definition that is available for realism is the universe as a whole is in time. And in Indian context, especially in a modern context, there are thinkers like Sri Aurobindo, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, K.C. Bhattacharya. These are some of the contemporary philosophers who are considered as Indian idealists. For example, Radhakrishnan's An Idealist View of Life exhibits that how he supports idealism. In the Western tradition, of course, it has got a long history. Thinkers like Aristotle is a realist, but there are thinkers like Bradley, F.H. Bradley, and others who are supporting the idealist school of thought. In Indian tradition, especially in classical Indian tradition, we come across the school of Nyaya Vaisheshika, which has supported the realist school of thought, whereas Sankhya school supported the holistic approach, that is combining both idealism as well as realism. But my concern here is to show how Ramanuja could be considered as a realist. Because Ramanuja is a realist. And his philosophy is in contradistinction to Sankara's idealism. In fact, I would say idealism in Indian philosophy is based on Pramanavada. It is said that reality is ultimately a product of consciousness or mind. So this in nutshell is idealism. That is, the reality is ultimately a product of consciousness or mind. Whereas realism supported the Pratyakshavada. Now you see the difference. Idealists supporting the Pramanavada and the realists supporting Pratyakshavada, wherein it is argued the external world exists objectively and independently of human perception. This perhaps we can consider as the basic principle in Vishishtadvaita philosophy. Sankara is one of the most influential idealistic philosophers in India because it propounds the doctrine of non-dualism, asserting that the ultimate reality called Brahman is identical with the individual consciousness or Atman. Similarly, if you come to Buddhism, one can say it, for example, the Yogacara Buddhism, it supports idealism. So I would say the classical Indian philosophy is divided into two school of thought, some supporting idealism, some supporting realism, and some supporting like Sankhya supporting both, presenting the holistic approach. Thus, they are divided among themselves. But my question here is, which is necessary or which is essential for solving human problems? And in this context, I must also mention about one important thinker, A.C. Mukherjee, who has combined both idealism and realism, and he has developed what is known as realistic idealism or idealistic realism. So in contemporary period also there are scholars supporting both. But in the contemporary period, we come across thinkers like Subramania Iyer, Kiriyanna, T.M.P. Mahadevan, S.S. Suryanarayana Sastry, all these great scholars support the idealistic philosophical school of thought. A.C. Mukherjee has written one important article in the year 1927. The title of the article is The Realist Conception of Idealism, where he talks about the significance of Kantian idealism. Immanuel Kant. Kant is a German idealist. A.C. Mukherjee compares Immanuel Kant and the Advaita of Sankara. But what is important is the main thesis of realism is that there is a reality which is totally independent of thought. Now, the question that could be raised here is, can there be a reality which is devoid of human presence? Because there is always the intersubjectivity that is involved. There is intersubjectivity is formed by the socio-linguistic world. Once you admit that the world is real, then you have to allow the human presence, which means human language is a must. And hence, one can say, in the realistic philosophy, as in the case of Ramanuja, there is always, one is always dependent on language. So this means a person has to develop his own concept of reality, and there is a need for intersubjectivity, which is developed by the socio-linguistic world. If you deny the empirical world, if you consider that the world is illusory, as in the case of Advaita Vedanta, then the intersubjectivity or the role of a human being or human presence is not accepted. So I would say Ramanuja, as a practical philosopher or a pragmatic philosopher, has developed a new scheme of understanding a philosophical discourse. And realism, I would say, that is especially Ramanuja's realism, has an epistemological basis, because any metaphysical thesis must have an epistemological basis, because there is a close link between epistemology and metaphysics in Indian tradition, and it is argued that epistemology actually is supported by metaphysics. So, in other words, one can say the metaphysical truths are supported or explained through epistemology. So, Ramanuja, as a realist epistemologist, has developed a new methodology which was not uh, approached by the earlier thinkers. This is my point with regard to Ramanuja's realism. Now, another point, which is, see, all this is very important in developing Ramanuja's realism. I would argue further that knowledge always is dependent on vastu. That's why we say that if knowledge is capable of revealing the object as it is, because of the fact it is dependent on the object. If the object is not there, then there is no knowledge. That's why we say it is vastu tantra. As the object, so is our knowledge. So there is no knowledge in the absence of objects. So we cannot deny the existence or the presence of the objects which are seen in the empirical worlds. And further, I would argue that knowledge means it is somebody's knowledge. It is not based on any personal factors such as imagination, wish, or desire, etc. The person concerned has no part with regard to the origination or non-origination of knowledge, nor could he alter it from being what it is. So this means knowledge is not person dependent. Please note that knowledge is not person dependent. It is not Purusha Tantra, but it is Vastu Tantra. Why I am concerned about this distinction is the Vastu Tantra and Purusha Tantra is to show that how Ramanuja's realistic philosophy approaches the concept of knowledge. First of all, he talks about knowledge is not an abstract term. Knowledge always involves some object or other. So which means knowledge is it is somebody's knowledge. So the object as well as the subject, that is I as a subject, and object which exists in the empirical world, both must be there. I cannot deny the existence of the objects as well as my own self, as in the case of Sankara. Now, what kind of realism is needed? Realism must have some solid foundation. In fact, in the Western tradition, there is a very big debate with regard to realism, and they talk about various kinds of realism. But all of the, for example, they talk about metaphysical realism and scientific realism. But what is important is, though there are different kinds of realism, all of them converge on one point, namely epistemology. So epistemology is very much essential in order to understand the significance of realism. So that epistemological realism, which Ramanuja emphasizes, is based on the empirical world, which means the empirical world or the external world cannot be rejected. We cannot come to the conclusion, a wrong conclusion, of course, that everything exists in my mind only. So the objects are real, the world is real, the object which I perceive is real. So Ramanuja has beautifully presented a realistic epistemology, which is something remarkable. One can say that there are two metaphysical trends in Indian context. One is the theistic metaphysical trend, and the other is a trans-theistic. The trans-theistic, I would say, is nothing but then an absolutistic or monistic approach towards reality, and one can place Advaita here, whereas in the context of theistic metaphysical trend, one can place Ramanuja's philosophy. So in Ramanuja's philosophy, Ramanuja as a realistic epistemologist would talk about what is known as the minimal theory, the minimum that is expected from a realist. This is actually, I'm using the word minimal theory from the Western context. And then I try to see Ramanuja in this context. Now, what is the minimum that is expected? Minimum. The minimum that is claimed in realistic epistemology is the admission that there is something called knowledge. First of all, we have to admit the fact that there is knowledge. So, on the basis of this minimal claim, the realists argue that consciousness to some object is always related to object. So the minimum claim that is made in epistemology is that knowledge has to allow the existence of the subject and the object. So there is nothing called knowledge in abstraction as the Advaitins would claim. So knowledge belongs to someone and is about something. These are the two important aspects which we have to take into account while dealing with the realistic epistemology of Sri Ramanuja. What is that? One is knowledge belongs to someone. For example, when I say, I see a laptop in my presence, that knowledge belongs to me. I say that I know that there is a table and on the table I have a laptop. So this is the knowledge I get. And it is about something. I'm talking about the object. What is the object? A table as well as the laptop which is on the table. So this means that knowledge is relational, requiring the subject as well as the object. Now, in the case of Advaita, it is not possible. So there comes the problem. So Ramanuja very beautifully explains the relation that exists between the subject and the object, and the relation between subject and object is possible provided you allow knowledge. Knowledge is once again is allowed provided you accept that there is a empirical world or the external world. If you deny the external world, if you say that there is no external world, everything is illusory, then all this will not follow. So there is no epistemology without subject-object relation. That's the reason why I would call Ramanuja as a realistic epistemologist. Knowledge is the picture of the object. In fact, this is what the famous philosopher Wittgenstein has said. One can see this in Ramanuja. Ramanuja's analysis of consciousness, for example, is based on this epistemological realism. Because please remember the definition which I gave in the beginning with regard to idealism. The idealism is the view that everything exists in the mind only, or consciousness, as in the form of consciousness. Now, Ramanuja would attack this approach of Sankara by saying that his notion of consciousness has to be analyzed from the epistemological realism. So there is a close link between epistemological realism and the nature of consciousness in the case of Ramanuja. Ramanuja argues that consciousness is two-way relational. What is that? It is related to an object on the one hand, and at the same time to the subject on the other. That's why I said there is a subject-object relation, which is very much essential for all knowledge. Now, Advaitins would give a transcendental view by transcending the subject-object relation, which is not acceptable to Ramanuja. That's why we call him as a realist. Consciousness, according to Ramanuja, is not only consciousness of some object, but also consciousness belonging to someone. This is what Ramanuja says in Sri Bhashya. I'll repeat. Consciousness is not only consciousness of some object, but also consciousness belonging to someone. See, this is what Sri Bhashya says. So, Ramanuja, since considers that consciousness of an object is always related to objects, one can say there is an intentional relation that exists. So, which means there is no consciousness which is devoid of objects. Now, you see my argument, how I am developing this argument. Because if you deny the objects, then you have to come to the conclusion there is no consciousness. There is no consciousness, but Ramanuja would say there is no consciousness which is devoid of objects. Once you involve object, then you have to talk about consciousness. And once you talk about consciousness, then you have to talk about the intentionality or what we call off relation. So Ramanuja says that nothing of this kind is ever known. By saying this, he criticizes Sankara's position. Now, idealism as a Pramanavada considers that reality ultimately is a product of consciousness or mind. Hence, we consider the external world as illusion, and the ultimate truth is consciousness. Now, Ramanuja would severely attack this position of Sankara, because the idealists claim that everything is a product of consciousness or mind. It is not possible at all, according to Ramanuja, because this Pramanavada would reject, first of all, the external world, and also it considers such a position would claim that the external world or the empirical world is illusory and ultimate truth is consciousness. Now you see how Ramanuja has given a very strong argument by opposing the idealistic position of Sankara. Now, sir, I have some more time. How much time I have now?
You
Sir,
carry
please
on.
go ahead.
Yeah, because no, I should not exceed time. That's why. At least 10 more minutes I'll take if you
Sure.
follow me. If you want me to stop at any time, I am ready to stop. Okay.
No.
Because okay, sir. Okay. So it is very much essential to understand the significance of Ramanuja by relating Ramanuja's position with that of metaphysics as well as epistemology. The beauty of Ramanuja's system or the beauty of Vishtadvaita is that it synthesizes both metaphysics as well as epistemology. That's why I would call this as epistemological realism, because it is not mere epistemology, mere metaphysics. You see, the major criticism that is leveled against Indian tradition by the Westerners is that it is metaphysics. And of course, metaphysics has been a very important tool, I would say, for philosophers. In the Western tradition, one can say from the time of Plato, we have been talking about metaphysics only, whether it is the concept of being, B capital, being, or consciousness, or mind. This has been the attitude of the Western philosophers from the time of Plato up to at least Heidegger. And of course, there are thinkers like when the analytic philosophy emerged as an important discipline, they say that metaphysics has to be rejected, and they try to develop the epistemological tools for understanding philosophical discourse. It is very much essential to note that how a philosopher builds up his case, because every philosopher has an ontological position. Uh, Professor Radha Raghunathan has been developing Brahma Vidya, some new concept called Brahma Vidya, how the Brahma Tattva is very much essential for each and every philosophical school of thought. This Brahma Tattva is nothing but the ontological position of a philosopher. Every philosopher has to build up his philosophical position on the basis of ontology, or I would say metaphysics. But the beauty of Ramanuja is it is not only metaphysics, but also it gives a logical grounding. That's why we say that Ramanuja talks about the epistemological realism. So any metaphysical thesis, as I said just now, must have an epistemological basis. Otherwise, if you simply have a metaphysical claim which is not supported by epistemology, then it becomes a bad metaphysics. In the words of Walsh, a Western thinker, there is nothing wrong in one being a metaphysician, but it all depends on how you develop your metaphysical system. There can be a good metaphysician or a bad metaphysician. So Ramanuja is not only a good metaphysician, but also an epistemological realist. By combining these two, he has developed his realism. So when the idealists claim that things exist only as an idea with no reality as material objects outside the mind, the responsibility of the realist is to show, right, that the object exists in themselves independent of our conscious of them, which means whether we are conscious or not, the external world exists outside me. Whether I'm conscious or not, there is a glass of water which exists in front of me. Whether I'm conscious of or not, there is a table outside this room. So this means objects exist independently of our consciousness. This is a very beautiful position of Ramanuja. So in realism, we can see how Pratyakshavada, because the climax, I would say, is that the realism is based on Pratyakshavada, perceptual understanding, the perceptual knowledge which I receive from the external world. Of course, one can argue that perceptual knowledge, Pratyaksha, has its own limitation, but in order to survive, or in order to see the logical foundation of the empirical world, we have to admit that there is an external world which exists objectively and independently of perception. So this argument is in favor of realism, and it shows that the material world, which has an ontological position or ontological existence. So Ramanuja thus takes a pragmatic view, which I would boldly say uh, is absent in Advaita Vedanta. So by developing a pragmatic view of knowledge, uh, Ramanuja has given a new methodology for understanding knowledge or jnana by saying knowledge is the basis of all human activities. So the practical activity, this means, plays a very important role in knowledge. So further, I would say the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge is not the goal of Ramanuja. That is, knowledge for knowledge's sake is not at all acceptable to Ramanuja. So now Ramanuja would never thought of knowledge as an end in itself. Please note that. Vedanta Desika, for example, says knowledge which man possesses is to help him secure the goals of life. This is a very beautiful quotation of Vedanta Desika. He says, I repeat, that knowledge which man possesses is to help him secure the goals of life. This is very important for adopting the appropriate means to secure these goals. I think this beautiful passage would explain the realistic position of Ramanuja, which tells us the fact that the world is real and there are goals to be achieved, and we have to secure these goals in this life itself. So the empirical world has its own existence. So for this, one can say Ramanuja supports this Satyadi, which means the question that one can raise here is, how do we understand the world? Ramanuja gives a metaphysical approach to understand how do we know the world. So the realistic approach to perception is something remarkable. And all of us know Satyadi is a methodology for understanding the distinction between the real and the apparent. And Satyadi represents that the world is a unified whole composed of distinct but inseparable elements. So Ramanuja would say it starts with the empirical world. And in Ramanuja's philosophy, you can see the spiritual as well as the material dimension of reality. So the real world as it is explained through the senses. That's why I said perceptual knowledge plays a very important role. So Ramanuja developed this holistic nature of epistemology, and he would argue that human effort as well as divine grace are necessary for attaining the true knowledge. And while talking about Satyadi, Ramanuja would say that all knowledge is inherently valid. This is also a very important methodology which Ramanuja has given us, that all knowledge is inherently valid. There is nothing called invalid knowledge. And even in the cases of illusion, this is very important, even in the case of illusion, every perceived object contains a trace of objective reality. So this Satyadi is also giving a practical orientation to human problems, I would say. And here I would like to make a distinction between the empirical phenomenology and the transcendental phenomenology. While talking about Sankara and Ramanuja, remember I said that one is an idealist and other is a realist, and I argued that the realistic approach is very much essential for human problems. Similarly, one can also make a distinction between, because some of the Advaitins would claim, like Professor R. Balasubramanian and others would claim, that Advaita is a transcendental phenomenology. And I would say that if you claim that Sankara is or Advaita is supporting transcendental phenomenology, then Ramanuja or Vishtadvaita would support what is known as the empirical phenomenology, because the empirical world is celebrated here. The empirical world is accepted as a fact. And not only that, in the empirical phenomenology of Ramanuja, the world is not unreal or illusory, and the role of it cannot be, that is, the role of the world cannot be neglected. And also that we should know the fact that the world plays an important role in understanding the nature of Brahman, right? And also, it is bhakti which is practiced in empirical life helps the individual self to understand the supreme nature of Vishnu. Thus, the philosophy of Ramanuja is empirical in nature, and by admitting the existence of the plurality of selves, the everydayness is purposeful and meaningful. And not only that, like the Western phenomenologists, Ramanuja would consider the importance of consciousness, which is related to the objects of the world. So, this is possible provided one accepts the existence of the object, and also if one accepts the existence of knowledge and the world in which they exist. So, as a great follower of tradition, Ramanuja explained the significance of the interrelation that exists between the past, present, and future. For example, the theory of evolution, creation, and dissolution comes under this. So his philosophy has a concern for a common man. This is also another reason why I would consider Ramanuja as a realist. He has a concern for common man and the upliftment of the common man. So Ramanuja presents a world where everyone can be a member and a participant. This is very important. I am a member and also I am a participant. So in his philosophy, the empirical existence is real and equality among human society is an existential fact. And his interpretation and understanding of the Prasthanatraya is novel and innovative because it has a direct relation with our Indian tradition and also human values. And what is fascinating is Ramanuja considers that the created world is as real as Brahman. And all of us know Advaita considers, or it talks about the significance of non-duality. But in Vishtadvaita, we talk about qualified monism, wherein it is argued that Vishnu, Chit, and Achit are the three realities. This is something really remarkable. In this context, I would say how the Vedantins talks about three Vedas, Vijatiya Veda, Sajatiya Veda, and Swagata Veda. And Swagata Veda is a very beautiful concept because in Swagata Veda, the internal distinction which exists between, for example, different parts of the cow, different parts of the same cow. So Ramanuja supports Swagata Veda by saying that there exists an aprasak siddhi relation in this reality. So he would claim that God is possessed of internal distinction, and there are within him both Chit and Achit mutually distinguished. So Ramanuja has given the three realities, three eternal realities, though Chit and Achit are dependent on Vishnu. So it is Ramanuja who, for the first time, I would say, stress the importance of bhakti, which is needed for a man. Only bhakti can console a common man. So renewed from time to time through the sense of through series of renaissance, through the Upanishads and through the epics and the Bhakti movement, and then through Renaissance, Ramanuja has taught the highest philosophy, which was the need of the hour. And his beautiful concepts like Bhakti and Prapatti are the two great contributions of Ramanuja. And also pure consciousness or pure identity, right? Pure identity, which the Advaitins talk about, right? Is a according to Ramanuja. And also the concept of other is very important because in Western tradition, Immanuel Levinas and others talk about the concept of other. And it is argued by Levinas that my existence is meaningful because of the other, right? But the other, the concept of other, has been respected by Ramanuja. This is also a remarkable aspect for which we have to salute Ramanuja. And also, one can see how Ramanuja, while understanding the reality, how he respected the other selves, right? They are real. The other selves are real according to him. And also, I would consider Ramanuja as the great environmentalist because both the Chit and Achit are accommodated in his philosophy. This means that both living and non-living are important. It is neither anthropocentrism nor theocentrism, but ecocentrism that is emphasized by Ramanuja. Because Achit, non-sentient, is also a part of the Supreme. So that is the reason it is said Chit, Achit, and Vishnu or Ishvara. So this is also very important that the egocentrism is emphasized by Ramanuja. In fact, I used to argue that in Ramanuja's philosophy, we find the cosmotheandric of Raimundo Panikkar, because Panikkar was a very important thinker who has talked about the significance of human being, God, as well as the world. So in Ramanuja's philosophy, one can see the cosmo-theo andric and dash and T andric. So Ramanuja, as a great not only epistemology, as a realist, has given a new methodology for understanding the world. In fact, I would say that in his philosophy, God does not exist in isolation from man and world. Man is not left alone from God and the physical world. Similarly, the world is not segregated from God and man. This is something really, remarkable. And Ramanuja, I'll take 5 minutes and complete. Ramanuja accepts the Upanishadic concept of creation in a literal sense. He says, God, who is omnipotent, creates the manifold world out of himself by a gracious act of will. Remember, in the beginning of my talk, I said that everything takes place according to realists in time. Now you can compare this with this statement, namely that Ramanuja is saying that the manifold world has been created by out of himself by a gracious act of will during the state of dissolution. That is pralaya. Now creation, according to Ramanuja, this is very, very important to consider Ramanuja as to consider Ramanuja, as a realist, we have to see how creation, the notion of creation, is approached by Ramanuja. Creation, according to Ramanuja, is a fact. It cannot be denied. It is not illusory. And the created world is as real as Brahman. Please note that. The created world is as real as Brahman. So Maya, in quotes, stands for God's power of creating the wonderful objects and things in this world. So all knowledge, according to Ramanuja, is true. So at one stroke, he cancels the attempt made by Sankara by saying that everything is illusion. In fact, in Sribhashya it is said, Yathartham Sarva Vijnanam, which means all knowledge is true. And also, and I am always fascinated by the way in which Ramanuja has developed the 7 criticisms, Sabdavidanubhavati, that is the criticism against Maya. When I read it for the first time, I was fascinated for the main reason that there is a logical rigor in this approach. And I always feel that the Advaitins, though they made an attempt to answer these 7 criticisms, they have not really succeeded in answering Ramanuja's questions. Because one question that is raised, that is very fascinating. 2 I would like to mention here. One is, where does the ignorance exist? This is a very, very important question. Where does ignorance exist? Then, ignorance is said to be neither real nor unreal, but indescribable. Hello? Ignorance is said to be neither real nor unreal, but indescribable, anirvachaniya. Now, when we are applying the 2-valued logic, now we know in logic, either a thing has to be A or not A. By applying 2-valued logic, one can easily criticize or one can find fault with the arguments given by the Mayavadins or the Advaitins. So Ramanuja has always something new to convey for the empirical world. And his theistic approach is something remarkable because he is one who could combine both immanent and transcendental concept of Brahman. In TKP's interesting book, this has been discussed at length, the immanent as well as transcendental aspects of Brahman. So, God, world, and man are 3 ultimate but distinct entities. They are related to each other, and there is integration which makes them as one organismic unity. That's why I gave the example of Swagata Veda. So there is nothing outside the totality. Brahman, Chit, and Achit. So Chit, Achit, Vishishtam Brahma means Brahman qualified by Chit and Achit. So the inseparable relation, the inseparability between God, man relation is explained by Tirumalizai Alvar in a Pasuram. I have translated it as follows: be it today, tomorrow, or a little later, your grace, O Narayana, is mine. Indeed, without you, I am not. And without me, you are not. This is a very beautiful, the last 2 lines have a lot of significance. For want of time, I'm not explaining this further. Vishadvaita school makes use of the soul-body relation in order to explain how the relation between God and man, as well as the relation between God and the physical world. In fact, Ramanuja in Sribhashya 2.1.9 says, or he develops the concept of a body. The body, according to Ramanuja in Sribhashya, has three characteristics. This is what he says in Sribhashya. Body, human body, has three characteristics. One is body is supported by soul, it is controlled by the soul, it exists to subserve the purpose of the soul. Now, these three characteristics of body very clearly explain that how Ramanuja's position is nothing but the realistic position in contradistinction to Sankara. Poigayalvar in Mudal Tiruvandadi 73 says, the Lord is the indwelling soul in everything in the physical world as well as in the world, physical universe as well as in the world. I quote Poigayalvar, he is the indwelling self of the mountain and the ocean full of water, of the pervasive ether and air, of the body and soul as well. So it is very clear from my short discussion, I think that all of you would agree that Ramanuja's position is nothing but the realistic position. The ontology which he is supporting, or the metaphysical position which he has been giving us, is also takes us to the realistic position. And also, one more point, there are different human values, the intellectual value, moral value, aesthetics value, and religious value. And all these values culminate in realism. This is what one can see in Ramanuja's realistic position. And also, finally, I would say that for the Westerners, the dichotomy between spirit and matter is a very big problem, because that's why some develop the concept of dualism, combining these two. Some supported mind, some supported spirit, some supporting the materialism. So there is always a conflict between matter and spirit, matter and spirit. But in Ramanuja's philosophy, this is also easily overcome, I would say, because for Ramanuja, this is not a very big problem, because Ramanuja would say that in Indian tradition, we talk about the materiality of the spirit and the spirituality of the matter. This actually solves the problem that is faced by the Advaitins, because for them, the material world is a problem. So they would speak about the spirituality, but here Ramanuja would say spirituality of the matter and materiality of the spirit. In this way, Ramanuja could easily overcome the difficulties that one can face if he adopts the methodology of idealism. Finally, I would say actually I have a lot to say on consciousness, which has been playing a very important role, but for want of time, I avoid that. But with a few more remarks, I would like to stop. I already said that when we are talking about consciousness, Ramanuja would talk about somebody's consciousness. The distinction between Sankara and Ramanuja, which would take us to this distinction between realism and idealism, is Ramanuja would say that consciousness is somebody's consciousness. But Shankara would say consciousness, pure consciousness. This something, when Ramanuja talks about somebody's consciousness, this somebody is a self or Atman to which consciousness is related. So For Ramanuja, consciousness, which is an attribute, requires a locus, ashraya, for its support. To quote Ramanuja, Sri Bhashya, I would like to quote from Sri Bhashya. This consciousness, that is anubhuti, which is also termed jnana, samvid, is a particular attribute belonging to a conscious self and related to an object. This is a very, unquote. This is also very clear. From this, it is very clear that consciousness is always related to an object. So Ramanuja criticizes that mere consciousness is the only reality. This is what the Advaitins or the idealists would claim. The view that consciousness is devoid of locus and object is a philosophical myth. This is what Vedanta Desika says. Because we have no such knowledge, right? There is no such entity. There is no knowledge of, there is no knowledge of any such entity. In Sri Bhashya, this is what Ramanuja says. So keeping this in mind, one can say that how both in Advaita and Vishtadvaita, they differ among themselves with regard to consciousness. Once again, this consciousness can be related to object, and object is related to the world. So my argument, basic argument, from consciousness, I can go to object. From object, I can go to the external world. And there comes a problem. The empirical world is real, right, for the Vishtadvaitins, but for the Advaitins, it is not so. So this basis is something which we have to take into account while dealing with the distinction between idealism and realism. Now, one more point I would, with that stop. The Advaitins would argue that consciousness at the empirical can be known through the relation with object, and in the transcendental stage, it is contentless and it cannot be known through materiality. It is argued that the self in Advaita Vedanta is something which has to be taken seriously, of course, but when they make the distinction between the self and not self, that actually creates innumerable problems. This problem is easily solved in Vishtadvaita. For example, in Vishtadvaita, we talk about the plurality of consciousness. Where is the pure consciousness state of Advaita? The plurality of consciousness is denied in Advaita Vedanta. So one can say that the Advaitins would make the distinction between functional consciousness and the foundational consciousness, and this is not acceptable to, the embodied consciousness and the disembodied consciousness, which is not acceptable to the Vishtadvaitins. So finally, I would say the intentionality of consciousness, which the Westerners speak about, could be seen in Vishtadvaita perspective. That also would support the view that that they are very close to the realistic position, which many of the Westerners speak about. So the pure consciousness, or bare consciousness, is not at all acceptable. So my final argument would be that it is very much essential to understand the significance of Ramanuja in the context of realism. Because the realism is the position which is need of the hour. Of course, idealism once played a very important role, no doubt, but we have to see which philosophy is essential, which philosophy gives solace to a common man, which philosophy can solve the problems of human beings. And I firmly believe that Ramanuja's position, especially he has developed a beautiful arguments in Sri Bhashya, and also Vedanta Desika in Sadadushini developed this further in order to say that the unqualified consciousness which the Advaitins talk of, cannot be accepted at all. So all this would make us uh, uh, clear that it is very much essential for us to support how knowledge is closely related to object, and not only that, there is always some characteristics that is involved. So I would say that this position of Ramanuja is a great contribution to philosophical discourse. And though there were later uh, people like Ananda Krishna Sastri and all the others made an attempt to give rejoinder, there is also other great acharyas like Uttamur, Veeravacharya, Swami, and others. They made an attempt to understand the problem in a beautiful way. So, what is interesting is the realism, anti-realism, or better, I would use the word idealism. The debate goes on continuously in Western as well as Indian tradition. And Indian tradition, one can easily connect this with Ramanuja and Sankara. But I would always say that we have to see the pragmatic approach, and the realistic position is a pragmatic approach, which is very much visible, and for which the Vishwadvaidin's contribution is something remarkable. So, with this, I would like to conclude, and I am grateful to you for patiently listening to my talk. How far I am successful, I don't know. But this is my humble attempt, and it is very difficult to talk in the presence of great Vaishnavist scholar. Uh, but but this is what I have understood from Vaishnavism, Vaishnavite philosophy. So with this I stop, and I would be happy if there are some questions or to support in support of my claim made by in view of realistic position of Ramanuja. Thank you very much.
Anyone can ask any question?
Yeah, actually, I would request Dr. Jagannivas to say a few words. I think it's most appropriate.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I really owe it to him, because we were all the while thinking Vishishta, Advaita, and Advaita have something in commonality and things like that. Yes, of course they have things in commonality, because the Brahma Satyam is a commonality between Vishishta, Advaita, and Advaita. But Advaita's explanation of the external world is unreal or a myth is something which was, boggling my mind. How can we really argue against this concept? But today, I think Dr. Panneerselvam really gave us the correct message, so that in case we confront with any Advaitis about this argument, we have a full knowledge about what Ramanuja has said in Sri Bhashya, and therefore we will be able to convince the Advaitis about this knowledge. So I think it's a very, very, very illuminating, illuminating lecture, and very beautiful. In that sense, it really opened up the minds of all of us sitting here, who are all Visishta Advaitins mostly. So it's a very good thing. Thank you very much, Professor Panneerselvam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Jagannivas.
If that is the last, any
Hello.
other question? Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
So you're
Hello?
Yes,
breaking. Please go ahead.
Motorola. Yes.
Yeah, yes. It is always pleasure for me to listen Professor Panneerselvam's lectures. He is a
Sir,
friend of
can you
mine.
show your face? You would like to know
sir,
who you are.
I'm
Please
not
switch
able
on to the video.
So I think he has some bandwidth issues, sir. I think we should go ahead with it. So please go ahead.
Is it all right, sir? Is it right?
Yeah, it's audible. Please go ahead.
Please introduce yourself enough.
It's gone on mute.
Yes, sir. We are waiting for you. Just
He-
introduce and then ask your question.
He's put it on mute actually on first time.
I think.
Ramanuja.
Sir, unmute. Your audio is muted, please. Okay, sir. I think he's not able to come again.
Sir, am I visible, sir?
So you're not visible, you're audible. Please go ahead. Please just introduce yourself and go.
Yes. Okay. There is enough. Sir, my friend Professor Paneerselvam has given a wonderful talk on the real Ramanuja and also the idealism of Sankara. And he has made very good arguments about arguing that Ramanuja philosophy is a philosophy of realism. And in realism of Ramanuja, and according Ramanuja talks about somebody's consciousness. So it is. I understand the argument of Professor Paneerselvam in favor of the realism of realistic arguments of Professor Paneerselvam towards Ramanuja's philosophy. But I got some difficulty. The difficulty is this. From epistemological point of view, if we argue like Professor Paneerselvam, the realistic position of Ramanuja is very, very clear and very, very obvious. But let us according to Ramanuja, these are real. So Chit and Achit are real. And but they constitute the body of God. But God is an idea, and then God, it is an idea, therefore it realism. And the selves are real. Okay. But they cannot exist on their own. In Ramanuja's philosophy, selves cannot exist on their own. The external world cannot exist on its own, but they depend upon God. And again, God is an idea. It culminates into idealism. Then how do we argue that Ramanuja is out and out a realist? This is my submission to Professor Paneerselvam.
Thank you. Is there any other question? I'll take.
I have one question.
Madam.
Lata here. So you were saying that there is no knowledge without any object. Only if the knowledge can be there, only if object is there. If the object is not there, there is no knowledge. So I had a doubt on that, like, were you talking about the knowledge of somebody or the pure knowledge? It was not very clear on, why do you say that there is no knowledge if there is no object?
Can I answer? Thank you very much for your questions. First of all, I am thankful to my good friend Dr. Jagannivas for explaining the position of Sankara. who considers that the empirical world as a myth, and Jaganneva sir told me that he has he has got some new way of understanding from my talk. Actually, this is a very important issue which Star is contemplating on, because I also had the same problem: how to encounter Sankara's position. So when I was planning to write a paper on Ramanuja as a realist, then I have to think that one has to start with the empirical worlds. That is a starting ground, or I would say that is a basic argument one has to start with. So if that be the case, then all this will follow: the empirical world, the knowledge, objects. So if you allow all this, then naturally one can consider Ramanuja as a realist. And how can one deny the empirical world? Of course, the argument from the Advaitins would be something different. They would say that at the Vyavaharika level, it may be true; at the Paramarthika level, it is not true. But this also has some problem. Once you say the illusoriness of the world, because it is like taking a leap. I have also written some paper how the Advaitins take shelter by moving from the empirical to the transcendent. So I thought then the best way to solve this problem is to consider Ramanuja as a realist. And there are many arguments by which one can consider Ramanuja as a realist. And moreover, I always feel that any philosophy which we preach or teach or we learn should be helpful to us, for a common man. What is that a system or a philosophy or philosopher gives? So I feel that the idealism will not help us in any way, though it has played its major role at one time. Now I think we have to see the practical problems for which empirical world is a basis. So that cannot be denied. So I thank Professor Jagannivas for his valuable comments. Then my good friend Professor Sambasiva Prasad is a professor retired, head of the Department of Philosophy from Sri Venkateswara University, Tirupati. I'm happy that he has joined. Yeah, this is a very important point which he has said. No doubt. The selves, he said, the selves as well as the world are dependent on God. God is an idea, no doubt. God is an idea. But I start from the other way. I would start from the empirical world. Once you start with the empirical world, then you have to consider that the world is real, that the world has its own existence, whether I perceive it or not, whether I participate it or not. So, when we talk about consciousness, moreover, when we talk about consciousness, it is always consciousness of somebody, consciousness of X or Y or Z. So, though one can consider, that's why I said, remember, that spirituality, spirit as well as matter, spirit versus matter. There is no dichotomy in Indian, especially in Vishnadvaita tradition, there is no problem at all. So both are accepted, spirit as well as matter. So though we can consider this achit, which is inert matter, it will not contradict with that of the idea of God. And moreover, when we consider all these three or eternal realities, though we say that God as well as, the world as well as man is not independent, they're dependent on God. This Swagata Veda really helps us. It is an idea because no, God or Ishvara or Brahman or Vishnu, it is an idea only, no doubt. But that idea, how we give life to that idea, I capital, how we consider that as a it is not mere idol. It has the significance. It has something to convey. So there we cannot consider God as mere idea. Perhaps for other systems that may be sound good. That's why we say that it is a theistic philosophy. In theism, the God, though one may say it is an idea, it has both life and blood, which means it has a practical value to a common man. So in this way, one can say that Ramanuja is a realist. But definitely, he is not an idealist. We can't consider him as an idealist. Then that would, because no, he start, Professor Somashiva Prasad, his analysis starts with the world as God as an idea. But I would say that we have to start with the empirical world. And from the empirical world, I build up my case, right? It is like a technique, deductive technique. And finally, I reach God. So all these premises, what are they? The world, the empirical world, and then knowledge, the subject and object distinction, all this would prove that the world is real and there is realistic philosophy. Okay, then with regard to Lata's very interesting question. Now, when I say the question which is very important is, can there be knowledge without an object? The Advaitins would say there can be knowledge or consciousness without the object. Vedanta Desika would say that such a knowledge, the so-called pure knowledge or pure consciousness, which you, the Advaitins, claim is an abstract term. It has nothing to do with the common man. It is not something, it is a bare consciousness, they would say. What is the use of such bare consciousness? Consciousness means there should be the involvement of the subject and the object. So the Advaitins cannot take a refuge by saying that in pure consciousness, all these are absent. And we are not benefited by such abstract knowledge or abstract pure consciousness. For example, there is a lot of discussion in Mandukya Karika that how the three kinds of knowledge, three states of knowledge, waking, dream, and deep sleep, where there is involvement of object, where is the fourth stage, Turiya, is pure consciousness, and that way we support that. But Vedanta Desika would simply reject the fourth one also. What is the proof, he is asking? How do I know that there is some bare consciousness or abstract consciousness without the object? Consciousness means it must always be related to object. So in this way, perhaps one can answer Lata's question. This is what I would like to say.
So that's all. Ask. Come on. Unmute.
Just observation, sir. When we are talking about consciousness as in the object, can we say Ramanuja is very close to Husserl, sir?
Yeah, that's what I said. Ramanuja's position comes very close to Husserl. Because in such consciousness, there is consciousness of something. This of something means some object or other must be there. We are talking about intentionality of consciousness. So there should be some object or other. Without that, there is no consciousness. So he comes very close to Husserl. That's why I said he can be considered as a empirical phenomenologist. With Advaitins say that Sankara is transcendental phenomenology, then I would say is empirical phenomenology. Because phenomenologists believe in objects and they talk about the intentionality of consciousness, which is very much present in Ramanuja. You are right.
Sir, thank you, sir. Then you are talking about a book, no, sir, written by Ramanuja's Understanding of Language.
Yeah, actually, I don't remember the title. I
Author
got
name-
that book long 20 years back from one Badrinath. There was one Badrinath who was in our department.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಸರ್ அந்த book
Very good.
author பேர் என்ன sir?
Yeah, I don't remember the author. It is something connected to language. Second time he gave me for a few days. I read it and gave it back. And
Sir,
then
you got
after
Lipner
that,
something, sir?
it is
Lipner.
Lipner. It is author is Lipner, but
LIP?
something connect LIPNER. I was trying to collect,
Okay, sir.
see
Thank
that
you.
book in net also. I could not get it, but it's a very wonderful book. It's a very good book on language. First time he has seen Ramanuja from many Western perspective, including that of Wittgenstein.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
So
Thank you,
thank you,
Pastor.
everybody. Now I request Madana Gopal Rangarajan to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. I will not take much of time. So, it is not very often that we get a very eminent, acclaimed scholar to come and actually, teach us and discuss matters of philosophy. It sounds almost unreal, but I think Dr. TKP made this into a reality. Okay. In one of the two things that the people say Ramanuja had in plenty when he approached the Visishtadvaitam or philosophy in his thing. First of all, he was very compassionate. He was worried about. He wanted to do something that will elevate the human beings. It'll elevate a lot of the human beings. It's very inclusive, everybody. Second thing that all our professors have told us is that he was extremely methodical. He took a lot of pains to go in detail to explain and in a very methodical way. Professor mentioned about Saptavidana Bhavati and all that. He was extraordinarily methodical. In a very coincidental way, Professor Panniselvam was also the same. He approached the whole lecture from there is reality as a battle, and there is idealism. But he approached it from the point of view of what does the human world need and how does it benefit. I think that's the first thing. And he was also extraordinarily methodical. So in a significant way, sir, you elevated the level of understanding of the whole group, and I'm sure the people a lot of them go through this on YouTube, the entire students and scholars and everybody go through it, and we'll recommend that. You elevated it in a very short time. It's impossible to do in such a short time such a elevated level of understanding of philosophy. We thank you so much for that.
Thank
We
you, sir.
hope we can have you more on more topics and more facets of Visishtadvaitam in the future also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We also thank all the other people who joined us in this class and actually asked some wonderful questions. I think that has also elevated the understanding of the whole group. So thank you very much, and thanks to all the people who also watch this offline in YouTube. We have a very popular, very frequently visited YouTube channel which these lectures are seen, and we thank all of them, sir. Sir,
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
So can we
Thank you,
close the?
sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Very enlightening subject. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.